Hi, this is Future Chris jumping in before this podcast to let you know that The Wretched is currently on Kickstarter to fund a second print run. The original print of The Wretched was only 25 physical copies and they sold out immediately. And since then, I've had a lot of people asking me, will he do a second run? And the answer is yes, I'm doing it right now. At the time of recording this, the campaign is about 600% funded. We've unlocked 2 stretch goals, including more music for the soundtrack and Wretched logo t-shirts, and we're heading towards the third and final stretch goal, which is even more music for the soundtrack and an exclusive, Kickstarter exclusive 10-inch vinyl. I'm really excited about it. I hope you are too. I hope you'll go and check out the campaign at bit.ly/wretchedks. That's wretched with a capital W and KS, both in capitals as well. There's another 2 weeks thereabouts to run on the campaign, and I'm really excited to get these books into the hands of people. So thank you very much. Please go check that out and enjoy this podcast. Thank you for listening.
Now recording.
Thank
There
you,
we go.
robot friend.
Don't worry about like language and stuff on this thing either.
Yeah,
I
was gonna
swear
ask, but
a lot.
I figured.
Uh,
Spirit of the times.
yeah, absolutely. The world's on fire. You can say fuck. It's fine. Cool. How do we do this? My brain's fried. Welcome to the Wretched Cast podcast, where I mumble into a microphone with friends about Wretched and Alone games with the people who make them. I have a guest today, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. If you could tell everyone who's listening who you are, what you do, what pronouns you use, etc.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Calle. I go by Umbra or Dealer Umbra on the internet. I use he and pronouns. I've made a bunch of games over the summer. Most notably for this podcast, I've made The Breached, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit about more in the very near future.
The very near future.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you said the title of the game because I've been calling it The Breached, but I was like, is that how he wanted people to say it? So I'm really glad you said that and got that out of the way.
Perfectly fine. I think the best way to say it is to put as heavy of an accent as on the brr as you can.
Breached.
Breached.
Fantastic.
Like a wrestling announcer. The
I'm going to put a big load of reverb and echo on you saying that.
Breached. Go for it.
It'll be massive.
Mm.
So, The Breached, which you
Yes.
made for Wretched Jam. It's a really cool example of a Wretched and Alone game because it kind of flips the formula a lot.
That's one of the things I wanted to do. When I set out to do this.
Yeah.
I was reading through the Wretched and the SRD, and I thought I had this idea from earlier. The idea for the breach basically came about. I don't want to say in a dream, but almost.
Say in a dream, that's fine.
Yeah, it came to me in a dream, like most great philosophy does. It was just this idea because at the time, I was going to preface this by saying that I'm a huge math nerd.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're going to get to later, I suspect.
I think we will.
Yeah. And at the time, I'd been watching all the videos about the 4-dimensional objects and how we might see 4-dimensional objects in a 3D world, in the 3D world that we live in. Lots of videos on that subject, and that more than anything, I think, is the central inspiration for the Breached's backstory idea of this fundamentally alien being that's lived in some other world before that we couldn't comprehend, and then it's trapped in our boring 3-dimensional space for a while, and eventually this thing leaves, goes back to where it came from, but then it's I don't want to say droppings, but like fallen branches of it
Yeah, you
have lingered behind them in our world, and not trying to do the best of a bad situation.
you describe it in the game as like offspring or offshoots of a fallen. What do you call it? A fallen dead
Fallen
god.
branch. Yeah,
Fallen branches of a dead god.
Yeah, fallen branches of the dead god.
So,
Phrasing
for anyone who's not familiar with the game who might be listening to this, it's cosmic horror where you are the cosmic horror.
Yeah, I've actually been working on an updated version of this where I call it divine horror
Okay.
rather than cosmic horror. I think it suits the subject matter a bit better. So that's coming in a version that I will probably be out before this goes live into the other.
Cool.
Yeah, so I've also been working on like a properly laid out version that isn't just a Google Doc.
So, the only reason anyone would be listening to this would be because they know what the Wretched and Wretched Jam games are, but your game doesn't use a Jenga tower.
No.
I thought it was really interesting reading it through because it doesn't use a Jenga tower. It's not a solo game, but it is still definitely Wretched and Alone, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it has all the other parts.
Yeah,
Make it
and
version.
that was cool because, like, in my head, like Wretched and Alone is solo journaling games played with a Jenga tower, and then I read this and was like, oh shit, I don't actually know what these things are, and I made them. So for people who don't know the game, can you talk us through the mechanics of Breach and kind of how it works?
Yeah, but basically, to distance it from other Wretched and Alone games, it's meant to be played with more people, somewhere between 2 and 4 usually. I think in the more recent version, I made it 3. It's like 2 to 3, and it presents itself as a cooperative game where you're supposed to work together to return to this before home place, and eventually it turns on its head when you realize, spoiler warning, that it's not cooperative at all. It's competitive, and only one of you will get to go home. And if you're playing it solo, if you're playing with some NPC breached, essentially, that might be a lost state for you. It might be that the game won this time.
So you can play it solo. It just works better with more people.
Yeah, if you're playing it solo, you have to sort of like automate for the other players. There's always going to be these different godlings competing with each other.
So I know the answers to this question, but I'm going to get you to answer it anyway. What did you replace the Jenga tower with? How does the game like physically work for people? What do you do when you play it?
Yeah, so most of the game works sort of similarly to what you would expect from a Russian Alone game, where you draw cards from a deck, you read the prompts, you fill them out. But what eventually replaces the Jenga tower is when you do draw the Ace of Hearts, when you are connected to the home world, you begin this basically like a stacking game where you try to stack up the hearts. You eventually collect all the heart cards over the course of the deck, and you try to stack it up, and whoever makes the whole stack 21, make it equal exactly 21, gets to go home, and everyone else is stayed behind.
So you're sort of playing blackjack with the Ace of Hearts at that point.
Yeah, in a sense, blackjack is definitely an inspiration, but it ends up a bit different mechanically, I think.
Yeah. So what was it? Did you go into the jam kind of specifically wanting to do something completely different, or was it once you came up with the idea for the game that you thought this needs different mechanics?
And I think first of all, the idea itself predated the jam by a little while, by like a month or so, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it basically just started with I got this idea of the god creature that's been stranded on a world for a time and then gets to go back. Like that first page of the document was basically like its own little story bit for a little while. Like I want to make this a game somehow, and then it just got like percolate for a little while.
Yeah.
And then I eventually heard of the jam through another designer friend of mine who's also made a submission. And I read up on the Wretched, I read up on the SRD, and I thought, you know what? This seems like a good system for embracing this idea that I had. And with the mechanics themselves, I knew that I wanted to do away with the Jenga tower because I don't have one.
Fair enough, yeah.
I don't have one around. The idea of making it cooperative came about from that fiction of it being like there's a bunch of these fallen branches of these little trapped goblins, and part of it was just wanting to subvert the standards a little bit.
Yeah.
That's something that comes to me a bit naturally. Is wanting to see like, okay, how far can I stretch this? How far can I take this thing and like make it something else a little bit? Let's see that as a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's almost like a ship of Theseus kind of thing, where it's like you're replacing all these parts, and
Yeah,
like
for sure.
at what point does it stop being a Wretched and Alone game? But yours is still definitely Wretched and Alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that. So the majority of these games kind of put ordinary humans in extraordinary situations,
Mm-hmm.
and yours is like the opposite of that.
Yeah, it's almost like a diametric opposite from like the Wretched itself.
Yeah,
Where it's like a human with a monster somewhere in a very small location over probably a very short period of time.
and yours is completely inhuman over potentially eons.
Yeah, over like hundreds and thousands of years, possibly.
I mention this game a lot because I really love it. It's probably my favorite game that came out of the jam. Is Before the Dawn, and that also flips it on its head where you play the monster. And I think there's something really I don't know. There's something that really appeals to me about being allowed to play a completely monstrous character that potentially has no redeeming features. And I don't know what that says about me.
I mean, there's always that allure of just there being something completely different from what you are.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
yeah.
That's the whole reason for role playing in general, isn't it?
Yeah, to some extent. We all want to be alien monsters. It's just the way things work. Sorry,
Yeah.
I
I
don't
mean,
make the rules.
it seems like a more simple life.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no taxes, there's no job.
Nobody telling you what to do, just eat anybody who gets in your way.
No co-workers, not for
Oh,
long.
God, that's the dream.
Yeah, you can just eat them.
So, I really like the club's part of your prompts, the remnants, which are about the people who used to worship the creature that you were a part of.
Yeah, it's
And
very much about what you leave behind after you're done in some way, be that through death or escape.
yeah, so like one of the things Matt and I talked about, and something I talked about with Spencer Campbell on an episode that hasn't come out yet, but will be out by the time this one comes out. For anyone listening, it'll be the last episode before this one.
It's in the future past.
Yes, is the idea of games as subsystems for other games.
Mm-hmm.
So like Nerds on a Roll podcast does this in their in the Rite of Cinders series. They spend one episode playing the skeletons to build the dungeon that they go into for the next episode. And
yeah, there's another podcast called Friends at the Table, which do this a lot with like various subsystems for like, parts of their campaigns. They can go back in time for a bit and play this system for like 5 sessions. Yeah, that's really fascinating to me as well, and I can definitely see this in some sense being used as like a world building tool.
Yeah, that's
Effect.
exactly what I was going to say. Like,
Mm.
I saw these prompts and thought, this you could build an entire world just with the prompts, just with the prompts for the clubs from this game.
Mm-hmm.
Like the journal that you record, which I love when you suggest etching it into stone. That's really fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yes, those are really fun. Just
yeah,
little ways to make each category a bit more special, and also to like sell what I call the aesthetic layer of the game, selling like the fiction,
yeah.
selling of like you are this other being, and we're just mortals trying to make sense of what you are.
This is something you did that's really interesting to me because lots of people kind of jumped onto the whole suggesting, like the Wretched, the journal is suggested that you do video logs, and I really like that you specified what each, not specified, but suggested like chronicling each suit from the Oracle in a different way. So like the Faith, the Spades ones, the best chronicles is like speeches or songs of praise and ceremonies, and then you've got the remnants that you say should be like obituaries and found footage short films. It's such a cool twist on the.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I felt was like, this could be explored a little bit because like these prompts are different from each other, and there's different ways to like say this thing to communicate what this prompt is saying.
One of my favorite things about reading all these games that came out of the jam is seeing people who took what I did and doing it better than I did it. And I think you absolutely fucking nailed it with especially this idea of doing all the different oracles differently. I'm so mad at myself that I didn't think of that.
Thank you. No, I think for your game it definitely makes sense that they're all one thing because it's a very focused experience. Because like the Wretched is very much like one thing. I
I
think it
wish,
makes sense. I think it makes
yeah.
sense for it to be. And I think it's also perfectly fine for it to be. Don't get me wrong. Like I think that's a good thing. I think it also makes sense for the journal entries to be the same thing.
So, oh god, what happened at Persephone 23 is your
Yes.
entry for what's so cool about Jam.
Yeah, it's one of two entries, but it's
One of two.
definitely yeah, yeah. I also made one about Stockholm's occult underground.
Hmm, cool. I've missed that one. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
this is another one. I'm sensing a theme, a couple of themes with your work here, right? One is that you like horror and space horror and cosmic horror, and we can totally talk about
Mm.
that.
Definitely in there.
The other thing that I noticed is this is another game where you've taken the format of what's so cool about outer space and you've started off presenting something that looks on the surface like a standard what's so cool about game,
Mhm.
and then you get to like page 3, I think it is, when the
Yeah.
blood starts to appear and suddenly you've got all these new mechanics and the game has changed completely from what you expected it to be.
Mhm. I think it's fun to because especially with the What's So Cool games, they're meant to be very small,
Hmm.
meant to be just like a few pages, and they still have a lot of the like mechanical weight to them. And that's definitely something I wanted to explore a little bit with Persephone. And just the blood thing is fun
I
because
loved
it's,
it.
yeah, it felt like I just got the idea while I was letting it out. And it's like, wouldn't it be fun if like, and I think it's been a while since I looked at the PDF itself, but I think it actually starts. If you look at the bottom of page, I want to say page 2,
Yeah,
there's just like it's tiny little blood
there's almost
splatters
like a little
there,
thumbprint on the bottom, and then it just.
and it's just like, oh no, yeah,
Yeah, I was looking at it on my phone at work, and I was scrolling, and I was like, "What is? Oh, oh, that's a load of blood."
yeah. That
And
game came about because I ran the Alien RPG
oh yeah,
relatively recently. Or I say relatively recently. Quarantine doesn't count. It was probably like last fall, actually.
It feels recent, but it was
Yeah.
it was an entire age of the world ago.
Yeah, several decades ago, in late 2019.
I think my favourite thing about the way you brought that blood in is that you've got the little blood splatter at the bottom of the page, and then at the very top of the next page, before the blood kicks in, are just the words "Oh God."
Yeah, that's something I enjoy doing. Just like breaking standards in some way. I don't know if you managed to have a look at Space Chimps just yet. One of my other
I
games.
haven't, but I'll go and have a look right now while we record this. We'll do it live.
We're doing it live. Yeah, I think there's a text-only version available for free.
Oh, it's okay. I'll grab it.
Yeah, just have a look at that. Yeah, that's also a game where I had fun with expressions a little bit. But it's a different kind of sci-fi. I've been told it's the classical 70s stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. So I'm gonna buy this game and download it as we record this podcast, and you're gonna hear a real time reaction to it.
Bring it to you live.
Cool. Let's The Breached. Space Chimps, which is a fucking great title.
Yeah, it's a hell of a story behind that.
Space Chimps is largely inspired by the musical works of Clutch, excellent. In particular, Space Grass and Escape from the Prison Planet. Oh, and Outer Wilds, cool. Oh shit, that layout's really cool.
Yeah, a little bit in there.
You are space chimps, secret astronauts on a government space program. They haven't mastered spaceflight for humans just yet, but for chimps it's working just fine in theory. This is cool. I really like this.
Yeah, that was mostly an experience in like seeing what I could do with one page.
I really like one-page games quite a lot. They strike this really interesting space, like design space for me. When I've tried to explain, I've got a friend who will remain nameless because he might come on this podcast at some point. He'll know who he is if he listens to this.
Hopefully he knows who he is.
He knows who he is. You know who you are. Who he doesn't get one-page games, and I keep trying to explain to him. The way I've tried to explain them is that if like your 3-volume fantasy role-playing game is your epic fantasy trilogy, and you know a slim book like Troika is a novel, then one-page games are like zine games are your short stories and your novellas, and a one-page game is almost like the flash fiction and the poetry of RPG design, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think the poetry comparison in particular is really good. Like here's a thing.
Yeah, and I think they also work a lot of the time as like proof of concept. Like I don't know about for you, but when I write a one-page game, it's often that I've got an idea for a mechanic that I think will be fun, and I hang a game off the rest of it and just do it in a page and see if it works. Is that like, how do you approach designing a one-page game?
For me, I think I haven't done like a lot of one-page games, but for me it's more, and I think this applies a bit more to like design in general. More often starts with an idea. Starts with like here's an experience that I want to create.
Mm-hmm.
For Space Chimps, it was just Space Chimps. Let's see what is that. What is that gameplay like? And then I find mechanics out of that. I rarely ever start with a mechanic. It's more often that I have this aesthetic in mind, and then try to find a mechanic or like iterate into a mechanic that works for that aesthetic.
So I tend that's really interesting because I was trying to do that today. I was trying to write a one-page game, and I started with the idea, and I iterated into the mechanic, and it's not a one-page game now. It's going to be like 16 pages. And anytime I start with an idea and try and find the mechanic to fix it, the game gets way bigger than a page. And it's only when I can say like, here is a core mechanic, and I'm going to hang fluff around it, that I can keep a game to one page. It's really weird. I'm kind of in awe of the fact that you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I have those games as well. Sometimes you start with an idea and then it's just, oh god, I'm gonna need so much stuff. to explain all of this. To, like,
Especially when you get
convey
into
this.
like more traditional games. Like I started
Mhm.
writing a sci-fi. I wanted to write FTL, the role playing game, and that's going to be like a 2 year, 200-page game by the time I finish it. I think.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I've also got like, some bigger stuff in the pipeline, but especially when it comes to, I like to call it the draw the rest of the owl stage of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've gone past the like starting sketches of what you want to do, and then it's just add all of the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I have a Blades and Dark hack that's been in the works for like a few years by now. I've rewritten so much stuff over the course of these years, and there's just so many small parts
Yeah.
that you need to write. I think that's what takes the most time. Not
Yeah.
also what's like. I don't want to say sucks the fun out of the game, but
I know what you mean. They
yeah,
always tend to come when you've finished writing the big bit that you were excited about,
yeah,
and you're towards the end of it, and you keep thinking, "Oh, I'm done," and then there's, "Oh, but no, you need to write this one more thing, and you need to write this one more thing," and then you've got to do layout.
yeah, yeah. One of the things that I actually started doing recently, and especially with what's it called, games that are just writing directly in the designer or publisher, whatever it's
Uh-huh.
called, rather than like writing in a Google document first and then moving it over.
I've heard a few people have said they do that, where they kind of almost do the layout first and then write directly into it.
Yeah, I almost feel like I'm cheating a little bit. I'm like skipping a step of like translating. Because that's definitely something that I've noticed now that I'm trying to get the bridge into proper layout form. There's definitely like a few things that I'm changing here and there, just like to fit with the layout. Like I'm changing like wording here and there, just to like, neatly fit it into
Yeah,
columns. That
that
sort of
happened a lot when I did layout on the Wretched originally, because I wrote it into Google Docs and then I tried to get all the card prompts onto one page for each suit and just was like, this isn't gonna work.
yeah.
I know that Avery Alder had said on Twitter a while ago that what she does is we'll do layout or approximate layout, and then she uses Scrivener and she sets a very strict word count for each section. So she'll split
Mm.
the game up into the sections she needs to write and then write it into Scrivener, but she can't go over the word count so that she knows it will fit into the layout without writing directly into like InDesign or Publisher or something like that. But I think if I had a better computer, I would absolutely be trying to write directly into InDesign.
Yeah, I'm very lucky that I've been able to. I use the Affinity programs, and they've worked for me just fine. I'm very glad that my laptop can handle them most of the time.
Yeah, I'm quite jealous. My during COVID lockdown when I wrote The Wretched, I was
Mm.
taking my laptop to work because I had no work to do in the office, so I could sit there and wait 45 minutes for it to boot and then another 20 minutes for Photoshop to
Mm.
load. I just can't fucking do that now.
Mm. Yeah, definitely been there.
So, what is it about horror games that you're drawn to?
It's something that I feel it's very difficult to do in, in like a role playing setting, and crucially, there's been a lot of games that have tried to do it and failed, either like not getting the mechanics right or like not supporting like horror at the table, or just grossly mishandling the content. Especially, I'm not going to name names, but one certain large horror influenced franchise of games set in a multitude of different worlds with multiple different creatures.
Hmm.
Focus more on other stuff
Yeah,
than the horror side of things.
I think there's going to kind of shock value is the easy out for people who don't know how to write horror, I think, a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I know how to write horror because I don't write horror.
Yeah, that's actually something I wanted to ask you. Would you consider the Wretched a horror game?
Yeah, I would. I didn't intend it to be a horror. Well, I did intend it to be a horror game because I wanted it to feel like a John Carpenter film, and John Carpenter makes
Mhm.
largely horror films. But I didn't. In my head, when I was writing it, it was a sci-fi game, and it was only when it was done that I was like, "This is Alien. It's sci-fi horror."
Mhm.
But then I've had people tell me that they think that Go Alone is a horror game, and I don't see that.
I have actually since him remembering the
So Go Alone is
scenes.
you are a sentient weapon who has been picked up by a new wielder, and you want to stop being used to kill people, and you just want to be put down and kind of left alone. And I've had a few people tell me that they think it's horror. I they're not. I'm not going to tell them they're wrong.
Yeah, it's like part of what makes games and like media in general so hard to classify.
Yeah,
Like what feels just like a fun adventure romp for someone might be a horror experience for someone else.
totally.
Mm.
I wonder if the reason everyone's suddenly writing horror games is because we're living in one.
Maybe I think this is definitely changed game design, if
Yeah.
and everything else.
I mean,
But
look at the kind of surge that solo games have had the past couple of months. Like
yeah,
things like Thousand Year Old Vampire.
yeah, like Ironsworn, even though it was obviously like big
Yeah,
beforehand, but remains some level of momentum
yeah,
retained.
absolutely. I'm no good at segues.
Mhm.
So so before we did this, we kind of chatted about what we might you might want to talk about, and you said that you wanted to talk about
Yeah,
math,
yeah.
and
Want
that
to talk about the M
specifically,
word?
yeah, and that you wanted to follow up on something that Matt and I talked about in episode 1, and
Yeah,
I'm excited because I don't know what you're going to say.
yeah. I re-listened to the first episode just to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting anyone. That yeah, something that came up during the jam itself was a thread on the community page on like how to approximate the Jenga tower
Yes,
with dice or whatnot. And I mean, I admit I contributed a little bit to that thread.
it's
But
okay.
yeah, I think sort of the the point that you've struck there is actually a very important one. When it comes to it's something that I think a lot about as both a math nerd and game designer.
Hmm.
Just the idea of what what it's called the randomizer that you use for your game.
Yeah,
Yeah, and to borrow a programming term, say that the randomizer is sort of like a superclass for dice. It's yeah, so dice are randomizers, but not all randomizers are dice.
yes, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. A randomizer is basically something that you add to the game to add uncertainty
Yeah,
to it. And the Jenga tower definitely qualifies as a randomizer. If you used a bunch of additional consequences that you don't necessarily that you don't necessarily have control over.
hmm,
Yeah. And your choice of randomizer is going to affect the play experience, which is sort of
yeah,
why it's important. Why sort of why I get the sentiment of like wanting to approximate it with dice, is because it's uh, simpler for you rather than like having to set up a Jenga tower and like playing it out.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
It
having to
also
tidy it up afterwards as well.
yeah, for sure.
I still have Jenga pieces on my floor from a month ago.
Yeah. Definitely have a deck of cards laying around here. It's been from one of my recent playthrough of another game. I think trying to replicate the Jenga tower with like trying to replicate the exact probability of it is I mean it's not ideal. It's sort of misses the point. Like, even if you could, it's not like you're not going to get the same experience.
Uh-huh.
So it's a part of the design. You're creating a different thing, which can be good in and of itself, of course. But it definitely is something to be aware of. And I think it's just something that I noticed while I was listening to the episode with you and Matt, and I think you hit an important point that just like the randomizer that you choose for the game is important. It says something about how it's played.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that completely. Like, so coming back to the Breached. Yeah, so you did away with the Jenga tower completely, and
the stacking game at the end. It's the closest thing that approximates it, and it also has the other people as randomizers. The other people are also randomizers. They also add different factors, whether or not they're like NPCs or people.
And you, if I'm remembering right, the dice play a bit of a bigger role in the Breached as well, right? You roll dice, I think, more often than you do in kind of standard Wretched and Alone.
Yeah. So the way that the dice work is that you can roll any number of dice, any number of standard d6 dice. And I want to say that I'm saying this right. Let's see.
I hate when you get asked a question about your own game and you have to look it up to find the answer.
Yeah,
I do it all the time.
I feel like I probably changed this 7 different times over the course of the development. Yeah, so if you can roll as many dice as you want. There are as many dice as you have. You can fit in one hand. And you roll a bunch of dice, as many as you want. For each even result, you draw a card. For each odd result, you pass a card to the player to your left. And then you take one of the cards that you have, reveal it, fill out the prompt, you're chronicling, and so on, and then pass your turn on to someone else.
So, what was the intent behind that? What did you want to kind of achieve with making people pass cards around? And
it's also something that I've been thinking about including more in the prompts. I want the players to sort of interact with each other a bit more, and also to add. It's also another randomizer in that sense, especially for the last part of the game, when you're basically passing cards to each other, and you might end up giving someone else the win. It's not. Eventually, it sort of becomes like a competitive memory game almost. We just remembering who has which cards, and like, okay, what card is this? Can I pass this? Okay, I should pass this to this person.
that's cool. So you introduce a kind of almost a traditional card game into it, where people are trying to actively, once they realise that they're no longer playing competitively. Let me put my teeth back in and try and say that again.
that they are playing competitively.
Yeah, that they are playing competitively. They suddenly start playing to win.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, and also one thing that I had to change here a bit because it's one, I like changing things, as we mentioned, and
Yeah.
two, because it works a bit differently. You no longer fail when you have all 4 kings.
Mm-hmm.
You fail on 2, just to make sure that it can happen. Because otherwise, it becomes rather astronomical for like one person to draw all 4 kings.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know the exact probability there, but it's probably there though, of drawing 4 specific cards and like revealing them.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, you listen to the first episode. Probability is not something I'm good at.
Yeah, and I mean it's something that I like, but I can't even begin to approximate.
Yeah. On a very base level, I can figure it out, and then as soon as it starts to get a little bit more complicated, I completely it hurts my head.
Yeah, I mean I rely on any dice for any more like complex probability.
Even
stuff.
when I put stuff into any dice, I look at what it spits out and I go, I don't understand what this is telling me.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it does require some.
I look at the percentages and I go, cool. I'm glad
sure.
I'm glad I checked.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I think that also plays into a bit like what's the younger tower and what it represents. You don't necessarily need to know like the exact probabilities every time. What you can know is just like just get a pointer in the right direction. It's like this thing that I'm saying here is that actually like is what are the maths that I'm putting in here representing what I want to say about the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's definitely something that I actually wrote about this on Twitter a while back. When it comes to selling the dream, when it comes to like, your game actually being what you say it is, and not something else. When it comes to like your mechanics lining up with the story that you're pitching. If you're like, oh, you're a powerful superhero. You're like you can do all sorts of crazy things, or like incredible things, and your mechanics are roll this d20. If you roll a 15 or higher, you succeed.
Yeah, it's not.
And then the player's going to feel betrayed. Like, then that's not lining up with the story that you've sold them.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's also something that it sort of ties into something that you and Matt talked about in the first episode, and something that you talked about on Twitter with regards to the debriefing of like being honest about what the game is.
Yeah. I like that you did that like completely up front in The Breached.
The Breached.
The Breached.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, yeah, this game might fuck with you, and if you think it's going to fuck with you, go read this bit and this bit before you play it. And I think so. I'm gonna do a second print of the Wretched.
Mm-hmm.
The Kickstarter for it might be running when this episode comes out. Actually, I haven't got a firm date yet, but this might be the episode where I record a little stab beforehand to say, "Hey, I've got a Kickstarter. Go back it."
This is future Chris.
Hey, this is future Chris.
To introduce you to past Chris.
I am not Jeff Stormer. I cannot get away with that. But yeah, one of the things I'm doing in the reprint is kind of putting putting any safety tools in it whatsoever, but explicitly being like, yo, go read this bit if you think it's going to mess with your head.
Yeah. I think in a game like this, it's very important to be upfront about those sort of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What have you got? Have you got anything coming up?
So I think I always have some like big projects in the pipeline. I think the most immediate one is for something that I know that you've talked about a bit as well for Folklore Jam.
Yes, Folklore Jam.
Yeah. I have a game written up for that that's been released called Bissette. It's about like Swedish peasant folklore in that sense. Local faith folk and the like. So that's probably going to be the next major project of getting that into layout. I also, relative to what we're talking about here, am working on the layout version of The Breach, and also doing some minor content updates for that. So that's what's on the way at the moment. Mostly is like taking the written stuff that I have and making it into a proper game.
So I think it's really interesting because you've released Vitra on your itch already.
Yeah.
Is that just in a plain text, kind of no layout version?
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. So I had a burst of productivity in a few weeks ago, when where I released like 4 games in a week.
Nice.
Most of those are text only. The other two are the what's it called about games, including Persephone, we talked about earlier. And something that I like doing now, and probably will do with The Breach once the layout version is finished, because they put the text version up for free,
Cool.
and then put the layout version behind the paywall.
That's a really cool idea. That's not something I've ever considered doing.
It's practically taken from creators that can afford to do it.
Yeah.
Mostly from there's a designer called Kevin Crawford, who wrote Start the Right Number, amongst other things.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's not to delve into his works too much, but it's a business model that he uses for most of his stuff. He has like a more basic version. I say it's still like several hundred pages long, layout, everything. He puts out for free, and then that's a more complex version with other stuff in it.
I might start doing that because Troika does that as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it's fairly common.
Yeah, I don't know why I've never thought of doing that. I've got so many games waiting for layout that I just want to release.
Yeah, I mean, it helps with just putting eyeballs on the game, just making sure that it's interesting. Because speaking of eyeballs, not and Persephone, not to draw this in the wrong direction, but I realized something in particular with that game, and another reason why horror is so interesting. At the time of recording, Persephone is my third most viewed game on Itch, despite being released for maybe a month by now. Compared to, I think it's got more views on it than The Breach itself.
Oh wow,
that's been out for longer. So, and I think, and looking at the like Itch analytics and whatnot, a lot of them, like almost a majority, are from like the horror tag because I tagged it horror.
Okay.
So that's definitely something that people are drawn to at the moment. Like it's definitely something that I've seen on Itch. Like people like horror games and want to check it out.
Huh.
And it's something that I've seen in the downloads as well. People are just interested. So it's definitely swayed me a little bit as well. So wanting to do like a bigger horror game.
I have literally just gone and added horror to the tags on the Wretched as you were saying that.
Yeah, don't be surprised if this is like a bit of a spike in views.
I will let you know if that works. So that's something that I'm really bad at tagging my games.
Just go because most of my like, especially their earlier stuff is like, a bit more abstract. I just went for like, whatever word came to mind, and especially with this last month, I realized that that's not the way to do it. Like you tag it with the stuff that people are going to look for.
I mean, yeah, that when you say it like that, that makes sense.
Yeah, like tag TTRPG with everything. Tag horror if you're making a horror game. Tag sci-fi if you're making a sci-fi game. Just make sure that people can find what they're looking for.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Why am I so bad at this?
It's a learning process for all of us.
It is.
Yeah, like it took me until like seeing the numbers that Persephone was making to be like, tags might actually be worth putting some time into.
Like, what did I do differently on this game?
Yeah, and that's also a game that I haven't promoted at all outside of the jam itself, and it's still like making numbers. Like I think I put up 8 tweets about it when I first released it, and then it just kind of took off.
Well, I am gonna have to start tagging my games then.
Yeah, for sure, it definitely helps.
Cool. I am slowly dying of like dehydration, so I think we might have to. Yeah, is it really hot in where you are as well?
It's very humid at the time.
Yeah.
And also rather hot. So yes, maybe we time it there.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's like so this is going to be episode 4, and like episode 1, obviously I know Matt really well. Episode 2, I know Jess quite well. And I've chatted to the one that's out before you is Spencer and Adam Boys. And I've chatted to them quite a lot online, and we don't know each other.
No.
So this was really fucking nerve-wracking for me to sit down and talk to you. So thank you for making it so pleasant and easy for me.
Yeah,
I
you're
really
trying.
appreciate it. I guess.
Lovely time to be here.
Oh,
Very much appreciated.
oh, you're very welcome.
Have
Anytime.
the opportunity to just shout into the void.
It's always fun.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap it up, I guess. So if you want to tell everyone again who you are, where they can find you, if you've got anything coming up that you want them to keep an eye out for.
Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Umbra or Dealer Umbra. You can find me probably on my Twitter, where I do most of my recently more random math rants, a little bit of game design, a lot of weird polls. And other than that, you can find my itch, or sell the games that we've been talking about, which is also at itch.io/dealerumbra. And yeah, that's me, I think. Hashtag eat your coworkers.
Hashtag eat your coworkers. I might title the episode "Eat Your Coworkers." I still haven't figured out how to end this fucking thing. This has been the Wretched Cast. Thank you very much for listening. This is a production of Loot the Room. You can find me on Twitter at Pangalactic. You can find me on itch at loottheroom.itch.uk. And you can listen to this podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast, because you're listening to this podcast. The end.
The Breach.
Hi, this is Future Chris jumping in again, just to remind you that the Kickstarter for the second print of The Wretched is currently running. Head to bit.ly/wretchedks, Wretched with a capital W, KS, also in capitals. Check it out, grab a copy of the physical edition or the updated PDF with the new layout, and enjoy. Thanks very much for listening.